I'm here today to talk about stakeholder management. And stakeholder management is something, in my honest opinion, that goes way beyond the professional world. It's actually something you can practice in your everyday lives as well. So it's actually a topic I really enjoy talking about. As you can see from the screen, my name is Charles Huang, and I'm a senior product manager at WeWork right now. Prior to that, I worked in product management at Spotify, at Mighty TV, and at Google as well. All right, so stakeholder management. Stakeholder management is one of those things that you're going to run across every day. And what this involves is making sure that all the parties that you work with in order to get your job complete are very happy with you. That's kind of like the simplest way to put it together in a nutshell. And the funny thing is that within the show Silicon Valley, they touch upon the topic quite a bit. So I'm going to talk about 3 main points. If there's anything that you take away from this presentation today, I want you to remember that when it comes to stakeholder management, the most important thing is about the people themselves. And then there are 2 other things that are very important, which is the principles that you want to abide by, and then process. Okay, when you're talking about people, the most important thing when you're going through stakeholder management, talking to other parties, let's say you're trying to launch a new feature or a service, and you need to talk to many other departments or teams in order to get your service or feature launched. This could be the engineering team, the marketing team, the finance team, the business development team. The most important thing to remember are the people that are involved. They're everyday people, just like yourself. So if you ever need to tell them something, imagine what it would feel like if someone came to you and did the same thing back. Everyone, at the core of every problem, all things distill down into the people that are involved. And there's going to be a diagram that is going to really shock you once I go further down about how important people actually play a role within all types of stakeholder management, within all types of negotiation, within all types of persuasion, within basically every single facet of your life. When it comes to people in stakeholder management, the most important thing is to identify the correct stakeholders. There are examples in the past that I can list of teams that I've worked on where they did not talk to the right departments to get things done, and they ran across with the entire project to figure out that they were never talking to the right people the entire time. An example of this could be when you're trying to launch a product to help a company figure out how much money they're making. Most likely you've seen this in types of software products like display a graph showing how much money is being made. An important question to ask yourself is, who are the people that are going to use this product every single day, and who are the ones that can actually create some sort of action as a result? From first response, someone might say it's going to be some sort of finance person. You might want to ask yourself, what is the finance person going to do with this information? There's actually a whole slew of people that are going to be looking at information like that, going from the leadership team, like the CEO, the COO, the chief product officer, to the finance team, to the business development team, because they want to understand what are some other opportunities that are out there. And that is something that's very important to identify early on, figuring out who are the correct customers of your product, and then as a result, who are the correct stakeholders. From here is what I was talking about before. The golden rule that I'm sure many of us have heard while we were growing up is to treat others how you would like to be treated. So when you're working with another team, there are very basic things that you can do that have nothing to do with business, that will grease the wheels of the conversation and make sure that the partnership that you need to form are going to be very easy to go along with. So the first thing is, you want to honor their time. You don't want to set like a 6-hour meeting block in the middle of their day and show up late to it, and also be completely unprepared for it. These are the types of things that you have to think about if you were from their perspective. If you were invited to a very extensive meeting and your counterparty showed up and they were not ready at all, how would that make you feel? Would it establish trust within that person? Would you want to work with them again in the future? Would there be doubts in your mind that would start to shake the foundations of their decision-making ability? So these are a couple of things that I usually try to honor and make sure I maintain. And I can tell you, if anyone ever does not do one of these things, it severely bothers me and it severely impacts the way that I view them and how they carry on their business operations and tasks as well. So a funny story about this is when I started my first job at Google, my manager came to me and told me, you'll have to talk to this team to get XYZ task done. So me being the recent college grad, having a ton of energy and not knowing how just basically like the business world works, I said, great, I'm going to set up a meeting with this person today in 2 hours, and we're going to get this done in an hour. And he said, hold on, this person's never met you before. He or she probably has a bunch of tasks that they need to do throughout the day. And for you to come and just create a meeting in their calendar, it's not going to be very inviting. And it's going to set the tone for how you're going to work with them in the future. As a result, I learned that usually what you want to do is you probably want to reach out to that person through email or chat and let them know, would it be okay to meet to discuss this topic? What it does is, first of all, it lets them know that there's someone interested in this topic. It lets them know what they need to prepare for that meeting as well. And also gives them an opportunity to let you know if maybe they're not the best person to talk to for that topic. Because in any organization, things are changing all the time. So perhaps the responsibilities have shifted to another team or another person that might be better suited for that. Fun fact from that story is that my manager's advice was extremely helpful because I realized that if I had set that meeting with that person on that day, he was on vacation and he was not the best person to talk to. And he was about to leave the company in 2 weeks. So it would have done nothing to do that right then and there. So there's a lot of things about honoring people's time. Attending the meetings on time. I know that usually you have to wait for a conference room. There are meetings that run over. It is completely within our power when a meeting ends on time to say, okay, I need to leave. I need to attend another commitment at this time. Obviously, there are always things that happen. If there's someone that's like, your skip manager or way above, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. But it's always helpful if you want to start the meeting saying that I have a hard stop at a certain time. I'm sure many of you have probably run across folks who do that as well. When you do that, you let folks know that you're really valuing their time and you're valuing the time of the person you're about to meet with as well. So these are very simple things that do not require a PhD or an MBA to kind of know what you need to do that's going to really affect the ways that your stakeholders are going to interact with you. Ending meetings on time. So B and C kind of tie together, but when you end a meeting on time, it sets a message that you had a clear agenda in mind and that you're able to wrap up all of your ideas concisely by a certain point. And setting clear agendas, which is the last point, is extremely important because the worst thing that could happen, or it's not the worst, but it's very annoying when someone puts a meeting in your calendar with no description whatsoever. They're just like brief sync or catch up. What are you catching up about? How can you prepare for this meeting ahead of time so that you can make sure the time is effectively used? These are the types of things that you want to keep in mind while you're working with your stakeholders. So tying all of that together, the people, if there's one thing that you take away from my entire presentation today is that when it comes to stakeholder management, think about your stakeholders as people, not as that opposing team that you need help from to get something done. Think about it as someone who is a son, a daughter, a father, a mother. They are a human being that has specific things that are going on in their personal life and their professional life. And think about how that is going to impact the way that you want to approach them or introduce new ideas to them or ask them for help. Okay, there's one main principle that I think is extremely overgeneralized and undervalued at all times, and that is the basis of communication. The reason I say this is because I have a lot of friends who majored in communication in college, and some of my other friends would laugh and say, that's not a real major, what are you studying? The interesting fact of the matter is that communication is an extremely complex concept, and a lot of people can mess it up very easily. The main points of communication, okay, I read this in a negotiation book that I'm going to address in the future. The main concept of communication is that you want to take whatever in your mind right now, that entire picture of how things are forming, how things are done, and you want to literally transplant this into someone else's mind. So they see it exactly in the way that you do as well. And I can guarantee you when you send someone an email, that's not what's going on. There actually needs to be many things that happen before that can be completely confirmed. So one way to help with this is to over-communicate. I'm sure you've all seen those friends that might seem a little anal when they're trying to plan an event. They reach out to you constantly. Maybe there's a reminder daily of this person has signed up for a ticket. Did you buy this yet? The deadline is coming up. There's a reason for that because they want you to understand the urgency of what is going on or because perhaps you might be a blocking factor for moving on to the next step. But when you over communicate, it is much more helpful than under communicating. The point is, when people are trying to say this, they want to get to the point where you can regurgitate the message back to them without having to think at all. And that is one way to guarantee that the message in their mind is starting to form within yours as well. Other things when it comes to communication. You want to clearly define and clarify the success metrics. What this means is that you want to define, when you have a meeting, you want to let people know what is the desired outcome that you want to have at the end. This could be, we make a decision on choosing A, B, or C for our new product set that's going to be launched in the future, or we choose A, B, or C person to lead a certain project. These are things that sometimes might not even require a meeting at all, but when you tell people how you're going to measure if something was done right or wrong, it's extremely helpful because they understand how they need to react as a result of that as well. Keeping short feedback loops. Who's ever heard of like Agile? Or like the Agile Scrum method. Okay, who's ever heard of waterfall? Okay, creating short feedback loops is actually like the main point of going from waterfall to Agile. Waterfall is like, for those of you who are not familiar, is a way of developing some sort of product, whether it's a software or a hardware product, that has a very cascading list of things that need to be done. And it basically, if you go all the way down and something stops here, you can't get to the final result. An example of this is when they used to build airplanes or battleships back in the past. There would be a huge plan that they would draft up with a 2-year timeline of getting this gigantic thing out. And if one thing stopped in week 6, it would like destroy the entire project. As a result, in the software development world, they started to create this thing called Agile, which deals with not creating this big bang thing at the end of 2 years, but creating very small things in very short increments so that you're continuously sending something to the customer that can be useful for them. And the biggest difference from the waterfall to the Agile methodology is that they shorten the feedback loop. So as opposed to having like a 2-year big bang project, they would cut it down to like 2 weeks or 1 week where they would work on something small and then send a demo or some small type of demonstration to their customer in order to say like, is this correct or not? And it's much better to know in a huge project 2 weeks in if you're going along the right track versus 6 months in, because then you realize if you're wasting time or not. One thing that I think is not very common in a lot of big companies is showcasing wins. So it's very easy to harp on things that go wrong, but when things go right, it's important to harp on that and to really let people know about it as well. Number one, because it's not done enough. And the other thing is that it actually boosts the morale of the team and can help with the productivity of everyone involved as well. Sometimes a lot of folks will say like, yeah, when you're trying to like manage stakeholder, you're trying to like be the cheerleader to like, move everything along. I can tell you that definitely helps because when everyone is in a good mood, it's much easier to work together than when everyone is in a bad mood. And then lastly, taking ownership and responsibility is an extremely powerful tool when working with stakeholders because it shows that you're someone that can be depended upon and can be trusted. If you're the type of person that likes to talk a lot and then all of a sudden says like, okay, so who's going to take care of it? It doesn't demonstrate a lot of trust and it's not someone that you would most likely want to work with either. There's a concept that one of my coworkers likes to bring up called the chicken principle versus the pig principle. And has anyone heard of that analogy before, chicken versus a pig? Okay, so for anyone who's not familiar, a chicken, what they usually do is lay eggs, and as soon as they lay an egg, it pops out and they can like walk along their day and like they're not bothered by anything anymore. They're just like, the egg is here, it's all good. But pork, like when you're trying to create bacon, right? This is kind of graphic, but you're literally like, pulling the skin off of them. So like they have a very vested interest in what's going on. So in general, people prefer to work with pigs because they're very like tied into the project. They feel very committed to it versus a chicken who's someone who just goes in, lays the egg and walks away and says like, I'm good. Okay. Yeah, you're going to remember this. You're going to remember this analogy for the rest of your life. And it's going to be really funny because you can have like, yeah. Okay. Another thing, I know this sounds like really, really funny to talk about, but There are 5 stages of communication. So you know how I was mentioning that a lot of people oversimplify communication, feel like it's not like a real concept? Communication is actually extremely complex. And I bet you had never thought that there are 5 stages to communication. When you want to let someone know about a new idea or something that's come across, or you want to communicate some sort of new update that's going on, number 1, you need to create the message. So you draft up the email and you write like the content. You need to send the message. There are many complications and many things that come up. You need to figure out who's the right person to send the email to. You need to figure out the best channel to send it to. So is it email? Is it Slack? Is it over Facebook Messenger? Is it through an event? Is it in person? Is it through a video? These are all things that you need to consider. But you create the message, you send the message. Someone else needs to receive that message and confirm that they've actually gotten it, and then read it. Okay, so it was not just like drafting something and sending it over. What happens is you are putting your idea down on something, you're sending it over, that person needs to open it, consume that information, and try to confirm that what you wrote makes sense with what they have in their mind. And the one thing that people usually forget about is step 5. The receiver may provide feedback to the sender. I know that when you send an email and someone sends something back that challenges you, it can seem annoying, but it actually shows that they really care about what you're writing and they're actually taking the time to consume it. So if you send something and nothing comes back, you kind of wonder, did they receive it? Did they understand it? Does it impact them in any way? Are they upset about it? Are they happy about it? Sometimes just sending the simple, I got it, this all makes sense, is extremely powerful. And you have to consider this when you're sending messages to others as well. So one way to help grease the wheels along with this is you need to, when you're sending the email, respond back with how someone can let you know that they like acknowledge the message. So you can say like, if you receive this and you agree, please respond back with like a yes, or respond back with dates that work for you, or respond back with people that you think we should follow up with. Some of my friends right now are trying to plan like a bachelor party with like 20 or so folks. When you're doing that, you need to let people know like, please get back to me and say whether or not you can attend, because it's going to severely impact what's going to occur in the main event itself. Process. So before I was talking about when you're working with stakeholders, you want to focus on the people. They're actually like everyday human beings, just like you and me. There's also the principles of communication. You go into the process and talk about some of the tools that people use to guarantee that communication is being preserved and that you're respecting the needs of like, the individuals themselves. So there are 4 main tools that I think are extremely beneficial, and there's a lot of reading and like additional material that you can brush up on, but it comes down to negotiation, shuttle diplomacy, managing expectations, and shielding the team. So managing expectations is probably like the most de facto stakeholder buzzword that's thrown around, but I'll go into that in a little bit more detail, like exactly how that can be achieved. Negotiation. This is the diagram that I said I was going to mention later on that's going to surprise a lot of people. In case the text is very small, what it says is, in a negotiation, there are outcome drivers. There are certain things that affect how the negotiation is going to take place. And this is taken from one of my favorite books. It's called Getting More by Jeremy Diamond. He is a professor on negotiation at UPenn that has walked through he's like a professional negotiator. When it has to do with like military conflicts, they literally bring this man in and they ask him to sit down at the table and help like warring generals figure out what the heck to do. So after many situations where his life has been on the line, he talked about what are some of the things that usually drive a decision to be made. And he mentioned that the biggest component, this green section here that goes way more than the 50%, are the people that are involved. And the process takes up the second most portion. And the last one is actually the substance itself. So think about that. The substance is the least amount of things that is going to affect the outcome of a result. What is an example of this that is going to be clear as day? So when you're working on a very hairy topic, something that's extremely complex, for example, the disarmament of nuclear bombs, right? You probably would prefer to talk about that with your best buddy or your best friend versus a crazy dictator of another country. The thing is, the substance is exactly the same. You're talking about something that can affect millions of lives. The process that you're going to go upon is something you're going to agree upon, but you know, and I'm sure like if anyone would disagree, please let me know. you probably love to talk about and like resolve this issue with your best friend from high school, college, a family member, your mother, your brother, your sibling, versus a random stranger on the street, because you have very little idea of what he or she is thinking about. But aside from the people, then the process, the way that you decide of how to go through the negotiation process is going to be extremely important as well. What is an example of this? I can give you a very clear example. I was figuring out how to divvy up the rent with my roommate back in the day. And we were trying to say, okay, what is going to make sense for how we divide this up? Is it by square footage? Is it by the amount of time spent in the apartment? When you agree with this, it helps a great deal. But when it comes down to the actual substance, this is like another very important thing I want to drive home. The substance of the negotiation usually is the smallest component of that negotiation itself. So when you're talking about things like family inheritance, the most important thing is actually not the substance of it itself, it's the people that you're going to be talking to, and then how you decide that you want to resolve that situation. If you can if you can like resolve these two things, 92% of your problem is already solved for you. Okay, shuttle diplomacy. Shuttle diplomacy. Has anyone heard of Henry Kissinger before? Okay, does anyone know, like, has anyone familiar with like how Henry Kissinger is related to shuttle diplomacy? Okay, shuttle diplomacy is one thing that Henry Kissinger was very well attributed to, and he used this technique a lot to help drive negotiations across Asia and the Middle East. So shuttle diplomacy, in his words, were serving as an intermediary amongst principals in a dispute without direct principal-to-principal contact. What this means, okay, in a nutshell, I drew it out in a diagram. When you're trying to deal with a very complex topic with multiple people, you do not want to talk with all those people about the most contentious thing right away. What you would want to do actually is you should talk to all the individual parties separately first and figure out what are the most important things that are bothering them individually, okay? Then you need to spend some time to think about it and figure out what is the best way to drive everyone towards a common goal. So the point of separating everyone in the beginning is to make sure that they feel comfortable sharing probably the most private information with you, and they want to make sure that others don't use it against them. So when you sit down with this individual, think about what makes them tick. Think about what's important to them. Think about what's not important to them. And do this with all those individuals as well. Your job as the person who needs to manage stakeholders is to figure out what are things that everyone cares about as a shared concept, okay? Because most likely when you bring that topic up, they're all going to want to help with that. And you need to figure out what are things that they don't agree about as well, because those are the things you probably want to avoid for the time being. So when it comes to shuttle diplomacy, you want to talk to each of the parties individually, figure out what are the things that are most important to them, and figure out what is being shared amongst that group. And then at the very end, talk to them all together, because then they're going to feel like some sort of crystallization was met and that something very important has been drawn at the very, very end. You can also meet with each of those individual parties multiple times in order to confirm things, if you're meeting with one party and they're saying certain thing and you might not necessarily believe them or you want to know more details, you can check with the other parties as well. But the thing is, you should never go into this right away, because you're going to be missing a lot of important information that's going to help you with the final decision of managing your stakeholders. Okay, so managing expectations. When it comes to managing expectations, there are a lot of tools that people use. I will have to say managing expectations is kind of like the most like smoke and mirrors thing that you can possibly do. But there are certain things that people do, like sandbagging. Have people heard of sandbagging as a term before? But it's when you overpromise and you underpromise and you overdeliver. But I would say, with those tactics aside, when it comes to managing expectations, when you work in product management, you never commit to a deadline. That's kind of one thing that people use. You'll say like, we're targeting for a certain date to be done. The way that you choose your words, the way that you communicate the message is extremely important. However, when it comes to managing expectations, what do you think is the most important part of it? I mentioned the word multiple times in the presentation. Communication is one. What else? It starts with a P. The people. Yes, the people are going to be extremely important. When you're managing expectations, it's much easier to manage expectations with someone who really likes working with you versus someone who really does not like working with you. So in order to help with this concept, it really helps to have good relationships with the folks that you need to work with. But like I mentioned, there are a lot of tools. Basically, always being very clear about what your success metrics are. What are the things that you're going to be paying attention to, and what are the signals that let you and your stakeholder know means that you've done a good job or not. When it comes to managing expectations, there also are other things that you can do. Sharing information, like showing vulnerability, is also another thing that really helps, because it lets the other party see you as a human being as well, and not just as like a robot that's meant to deliver some sort of feature or thing to them at the very end. One of the things that I like to do is very hard, and like it requires very tough. As soon as you fail on something, you need to admit it right away. If you know that you're about to work on a big deadline or a big project and you caught wind of something that's going to jeopardize it, you need to mention it right away. You need to let the team know that like we found this thing, because if they hear about it sooner rather than later, they can adjust to it as well. And you're going to gain a lot more respect by doing this versus holding it until the day right before someone is expecting an answer. So it's very tough to do, because obviously, like as human beings, we never want to disappoint other individuals. But the thing is, you're helping everyone by bringing the surface to light as soon as you can, versus holding it and trying to figure things out and figure out what's the perfect communication to send back to the customer. When you start doing these things right away, it helps immensely. And it also builds trust and also manages expectations very well. The last thing on the whole process is shielding the team. This is actually one of the things that is probably on the forefront of most product management responsibilities. When it comes to managing stakeholders, you realize that you're doing this on behalf of another party, usually probably a team of developers, usually your particular team, people who report to you, things like this. There are many things that happen in that negotiation phase that don't need to affect the team at all, and probably would just like introduce a lot of extra, just like going in circles for the team itself. One thing is the most important thing is that you want to shield them from a lot of the craziness that's occurring from above. And this is something that becomes more and more apparent when you run into amazing managers, like while you're going through your career. But one thing that I've noticed is that the meetings that your manager chooses to include you in or not makes a big difference, and it's something that's going to be felt extremely it's extremely impactful on the team itself. When there are things like politics, territorial things, ownership, things like that, you want to make sure that you don't let your team feel like they're being jeopardized as a result. These are things that you can talk about and figure out what is going to be in the best interest of the team, and then share with them at the very end. Because while the negotiations are going on, if they're just worrying about it the whole time, it's not going to help anyone in the long run as well. So, in summary, I talked about three main components today. When it comes to managing stakeholders, the people are the most important part. The principle of communication is extremely important, and the process is going to help you along in the way as well. When you're trying to come to an outcome of any type of negotiation or any type of engagement with a stakeholder, if you can solve, or if you can push the people and the process in your favor, 92% of the issue is going to be resolved for you. When it comes to people, remember that even though they're a stakeholder or a customer or some person on the opposite end of the business, they are people too. They are human beings. They have everyday lives that they're trying to go through. So treat them with respect and treat them how you would like to be treated as well. When it comes to communication, there are literally 5 stages of communication. It's not just sending an email through and hoping that they get the message. And then when it comes to process, there are a lot of tools that you can take advantage within your arsenal, such as negotiation, shuttle diplomacy, managing expectations, and shielding the team. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions. Yes?
How do you manage very senior internal stakeholders who oversee like multiple products, not just your own, and they kind of come in last minute and throw in some random like unformed opinions, and it kind of throws your team a little bit into disarray? So I know it falls under managing your team, but how do you get their attention early enough when it doesn't seem like a priority compared to everything else you're dealing with at the time, but then it affects you way later?
Yeah. So, okay, you're saying how can you like resolve the situation where a very senior leader comes in at the last minute and kind of just like shakes everything up? So you kind of answered your question at the end. I don't know if you noticed this, but like reaching out to those senior leaders, if you can identify those people early, identifying the right stakeholders, reach out to them early as well. So you can try to mitigate that. If it's happening, like as a matter of fact, like it's happening now.
What if it's like not a priority, like way early on?
Yes.
It's like kind of just falls through the cracks for them?
Yes.
Like, how do you deal with that?
If it's happening at that particular point in time, what you can do is let them know there's a process that everyone's working through, and that like there is an agreement in place of how things should be done. If the senior leader is pushing back on you, what I usually do is just escalate that right away. What you can do, there is leadership on your side that is there to support it as well. And what it's going to happen as a result is like if they realize that coming in hot on the last minute is not going to work out, they're going to be more responsive in the future. So what happens is like they probably need to learn from the first iteration, and then afterwards you can say this is the process of how we usually go through making changes or pushing out updates, and then like this is when you need to be involved. The other thing is, yes, they might have a million things that they're working on, but the thing is when you like take ownership and you reach out to them ahead of time, it's going to help them along with the process as well, so that like they need to think less about exactly what they need to do, keeping on top of deadlines. It is something that you can do proactive in as well. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great.
Points you make here. For example, say you have a proposal that you send to stakeholders, and they have some very critical feedback on one of the components, and because of that, it's blocking the entire project for the rest of the proposal. Do you have any thoughts on trying to sideline that feedback and try to move forward with the project?
I would say if this type of stuff ever happens in a meeting and you realize it's going to blow up into like a gigantic can of worms, just table and say, like, we'll have a separate conversation, just so like it doesn't compromise and confuse everyone else that's within the room as well. The other thing is most of the time, people are going to react very fervently to it because it affects them in a certain way. But it's actually up to like your job to figure out, is it a blocker? Is it actually something that's going to stop the entire release of a product? Are there things that you can do to like reduce the scope of certain things that you're working on such that they're not going to be affected by it, or they're not going to affect the project as well? Another tool that people use is this concept of like a fast follow. So they'll say like, we'll launch a certain thing and then we'll work on your thing right away afterwards. And then the main thing when people do that, they want to make sure that their voice is being heard. And then you can assuage that, you can recognize that, and you can resolve that by letting them know like, I've heard your point. We can go forward with these things. We've checked with a bunch of different teams like the InfoSec team, the legal team, privacy team. We know that this is okay. We'll do this first, and then we're going to address your issue like right away after that.
And I'm sure that there might be some conflicting situation between different stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
And you realize that it's almost impossible to satisfy all the needs or their interest of the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, you have to put a certain group of stakeholders way over the rest of all. And when you have to make the decisions, how confirm that you make the right decisions?
Yes. So your question is, you have a lot of stakeholders, but you find out like some of them are probably more important than the others. Like, what can you do to like help everyone get on the same page and like share that message across?
And like when you make the decision, so okay, I will go with that.
Yeah.
How can I confirm?
How can you confirm that it's the right decision?
That
Okay.
you made the right decision?
Yeah. So I feel like I'm going to say the most cliche thing. It's like such a cop-out. But usually what you do in that situation, right, you need to show to all the parties like the cost benefit analysis. So what you want to do is for the most important stakeholders, they probably realize this. You need to let them know that their aspect of the whatever decision is being made affects a ton of people within the company. But then another stakeholder, maybe it affects like a smaller portion of the company. And you need to show them like, in order to make this decision, there's a certain energy that needs to be spent by your team. And if you have 100 points to allocate to these two stakeholders, and if you allocate 50 and 50, but one of them is going to impact 900 people and the other one is going to impact 100, if you multiply those two numbers together, you can have like a number to show like, this is how we're using our resources and the impact it's going to have. But if you show how you adjust those numbers to say, perhaps for the team that impacts 900 people, we allocate more. So instead of 50-50, we do 75-25. You can show that overall number is going to increase. that's one way you can show to all of your stakeholders, like, we are making the right decision here, because it's impacting a lot more people and going to benefit a lot more people as a result.
And if so, then do I have to more focus on the short-term, like profits, or like such as net earnings, like, or rather than long-term vision?
So that's a very interesting question, and it varies from company to company. So this is the kind of stuff I wish I had a simple answer.
The perspective of startups that needs to develop, like fast way.
In the perspective of a startup that needs to develop things very quickly, I would say what you most likely have to do is go for the short-term thing and then find a way to preserve that long-term vision. But if there's a way to do both, that's obviously the best decision. But usually in like most bigger companies, I think they would say like, you want to focus on the longer term thing, make that short-term sacrifice. But that's why I said like it varies from company to company. If it's in the situation of the startup, probably the short-term like revenue is more important in the immediate onset.
I understand.
Yeah.
I can add something.
Yeah.
So generally companies, even if it's a startup or a mid-sized company, they have certain criteria for prioritization. And if you can define and identify those, that can be another data point for you to make that call for which path.
Yeah, so if you're able,
Talk to me.
yeah, all right. Yes.
I have a question like regarding managing stakeholders who are overpromised.
Overpromise, okay.
You know for sure like this is not something they are going to get. How do you handle it?
Okay, so I've run across this situation multiple times, and there are many different ways that it can unfold. Sometimes it might be like the previous team or the previous people that were involved like made crazy, wild promises. So this is one of those things where you're going to miss the deadline, you need to let them know right away. So in that situation, what I would do is go to the customer, the stakeholder, and let them know that you were brought into this as a new person, and there might have been crazy promises made in the past, and you apologize, but you cannot, like, it's not realistic. And you can even say like, you're not even sure why the previous party like agreed to those things. But like, if it comes like after the fact, it's usually helpful. And I would say like the best decision to go in, let the stakeholder know this is not going to be possible. Let's work on a new plan to figure out something that's more realistic. If it's something that you realize was overpromised like beforehand and you were involved in that decision, the most important thing is to inform the stakeholder of what variables changed. What has changed to make you feel like this is no longer a realistic target? Yeah.
Just to provide more clarity, I work in a consulting industry, so there is always some sales teams and contracts are signed. And so if you change anything at data point, there is always a dollar impact.
Yes.
So
yes.
At that time, things becomes very tricky when money is indirectly involved.
Yes.
And it happens very frequently.
Yeah, I would say, so for those types, when you're creating those types of proposals, a lot of assumptions are made usually, right? Like not all the information is present in the beginning. I think it's like as you learn more and you gain more clarity and you start to remove the unknowns, it's an opportunity for you to go back to the customer and say like, we made the wrong assumption back then and this is how things are going to be impacted as a result. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. All right. I remember there's a question in the back here. Yeah.
What's the best way to manage like stakeholders who really aren't in the weeds of anything and then just don't really understand the complexity
Yes.
of your product and can't understand why you need it?
Yes. So to reiterate your question, like how do you manage stakeholders who have no idea what's going on? Like they're just like way too high level. Okay, so I run across this all the time, to be completely honest. It's a very common thing. What I like to do is actually I talk to the individual team members that most likely the stakeholder is like pretty high up in the organization. So I talk to the people that are like within the team and working on the actual tools themselves. And what you can do is say, if the stakeholder mentions something that doesn't really make sense, you can say, actually, I've talked to this engineer or this data scientist or this XYZ person on your team, and I've learned that this is the situation that they're running across. And you can save them the moment of embarrassment. You don't have to tell them like, you're wrong, you don't know what's going on. But you say, I talked to Mike on your team and he informed me that this is something that's happened. And I spoke to him 2 days ago or something like that. So it's one of those times where it's very humbling to go like down the ranks and say like, this person actually is in it every day and knows all the details that are going on. And then it's going to encourage that stakeholder to like really drill down and like, talk to their team more to figure out exactly what is going on. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay, great. Other question? Yes.
Yeah, so my question is, what are your thoughts around if you've been hired to start a new product line within a very old company where the culture is maybe conservative, I would say,
Yeah.
and then and about basically, let's take data science and everything, and people have like broken knowledge about what data science actually is.
Okay.
So how do you start this whole education process within the company?
Okay. That's a huge question. Yeah, sure. I'll repeat the question. So I'll reiterate the question just to make sure I got it. Okay. So I think what you're asking is, let's say you're tasked with starting a new team, right? A new initiative in the company, and you want to introduce the concept of data science or like how to make a company data driven, but there's very broken knowledge. Like not everyone in the company has a full understanding of exactly how that happens. I think your question is like, how do you roll this out? How do you make your company data driven? This is something we're going, like every company is going to go through, and I can tell you like we're going through it at WeWork as well. There are a certain number of things that you need to do. And I've seen a lot of people refer to it as like, you need to increase the level of data maturity within an organization. So data maturity, what do I mean by this? It's like how familiar and how people are using information throughout the company. Step zero, like usually what you need to do first is introduce the data points into the company. So at first, it depends on like how far along the track you are, but you need to identify how is the company collecting information points in the beginning. Is it through Mixpanel? Are there certain companies that they're using to like, have some sort of graphs or charts that they're analyzing? Is there anything at all? Is there a way to build it into the product so it emits certain events or it emits certain signals? So you know how many people are signing up, what are the actions that are occurring within the product, if at all. From there, you need to have the information present. So that's the first step. You can't start with anywhere else besides that. Then what you do is you take this information and you start to build insight on top of it. So you need to, at that point, have data analysts. You need to have like maybe data scientists, or it might still be early, but you need to have ways for people to take that information and build patterns on top of it, or figure out what are the trends, what are the correlations, if X, like what happens to Y when you increase or decrease X based on historical records. So that brings you from level 0 of data maturity of like no using information at all to using information in some way. And usually it's going to be like a very static or a linear way of looking at information. From there, you introduce, and this is like, I feel like the phase that most companies are trying to get to at this point. You go into like machine learning, you go into data science, you go into what are things that you can do to predict what's going to happen in the future versus looking in the past. So I don't know if there are any data science friends in here, but there's like 3 main ways of like describing data science. There's like descriptive, prescriptive, and predictive. So like what happens is you need to start. Predictive is the very last one. It's very hard. Or no, prescriptive is the last one, and every company is trying to get there. Prescriptive means like some system recommends that you should do this, and it's going to make you more money. From there, you need to get to this last point. You need to have some sort of like predictive, right? There's some way for you can say that, oh, if I do this, then this is probably going to help. And I have a slider. Like if I put more money into this, I'm going to make more money as a result. And then at the very bottom is like, you need to have that information there, descriptive. You need to have some way to show that this is happening. So to answer your question directly, you need to have a way to layer those things all on top. And it starts with number 1, introducing data to the company. Number 2, being able to find patterns from that information. And then number 3, being able to do higher order level thinking things from the information itself.
I kind of agree with you. Like people are not celebrating wins a lot, really. So I kind of want to get your sense on, what is the right time, to celebrate wins? And in your experience, how do you celebrate wins in the right place so that the stakeholders actually acknowledge it and, make an impact in their minds? They know that you did a great job.
Yeah. So when is the best time to celebrate? Like, how do you know that it's like a decent situation to celebrate success? It's a very interesting question, and I think not a lot of people ask that question enough. So I've actually been accused of celebrating way too early, but usually what you want to do is the best time to celebrate is after something has been like shipped, has been released, has been like, there's been a clear switch from A to B, right? That is usually the best time to celebrate. However, it usually takes a while to get there. But it usually is like the time for like the biggest bang, because at that point you have customer feedback, you have people who are telling you from before like what they've experienced with the product. That's usually when you do things like the nature of the event, actually, of the celebration makes a big difference as well. That's usually when you have some sort of launch party, or you get people together and you have like, some cupcakes or some drinks or whatever it may be. But earlier on in the process, when you just get like the first working prototype, or you have the first like end-to-end use case, meaning like someone was able to take information, do something, and then come up with a result, and there's some sort of like a graph or some sort of analysis or some sort of visualization they were able to show. It's important to, at that point, you can send out an email, you can send out a Slack message, you can send a GIF or an emoji, But the thing is, you want to be able to help the team recognize that they are going along in the positive direction. So I would say the usual best time to celebrate is like after something has been fully realized. Like the deliver on the promise. Hopefully you didn't overpromise the customer, but you've delivered something to them. It's the best time to celebrate. But there are certain things in the beginning when you get the first piece of positive customer feedback. Share that with the team. That's actually been like, I feel like one of the secret weapons I've had. Whenever I receive positive feedback from any type of customer or stakeholder, the first thing I do is I blast it publicly to our team channel, because then they can all see like, oh, we did this one thing yesterday, but it actually is making a big difference, and someone actually said something about it. So it deals with like, when is the best time to celebrate and how you celebrate it. In the beginning, when it's like not fully fledged out, like fully out there, you can do smaller things like, just going up to someone and telling them the positive feedback, sending a message to the team, sending an email, getting a senior leader to come to your team and say, great job. Like you all are actually helping the bottom line or our department achieve its goals is very powerful as well. Another thing that like I usually like to do is during all hands, like when you get the whole team together, I like to invite VPs and directors of other organizations to come by and talk about how our products are affecting their departments as well. And then when you get to the final release, like having some sort of big bang event. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, great.